Democratization of Data. We have with us Pramod Singh, who's Chief Analytics Officer at Yodlee. He's responsible for delivering analytics solutions for the enterprise. Before joining Yodlee, Pramod was Director of Digital and Big Data Analytics at HP. He has more than 20 years of leadership experience in leading analytics teams and design and implementation of analytics solutions. Pramod was with HP since 2000 in different roles. Pleasure to have him here. Please join us. Welcome Pramod Singh this afternoon.
Thank you. So, am I audible? Perfect. Yes, I think they'll keep this. I know the mid-afternoon sessions are tough. You probably go need some more coffee here. And I walked in a little early for the panel discussion, right? And very engaged discussion. And I think as I was listening to the speakers, realized my journey a little bit, right? On the analytics side. So I was a PhD student in mathematics, way back, in mid-90s, and a bit of what I call an accidental data scientist. So I remember I had taken in US, my PhD qualifier at University of Arkansas. I was about to take my PhD qualifier, and one of my colleagues, one of the PhD students, her husband used to work at Walmart's information division there, right? So she said, why don't you take a break? You've been working very hard, take a semester break, go work there, and then, get some experience, come back, and then, finish your PhD, right? So, and it was a casual conversation, we had it, I forget about it, and then one day, when I was getting ready to go to university, I get a call from Walmart, right? And they said, this is Catherine from Walmart, this is Pramod Singh, we want to talk to you. So the first thought which came to my mind was maybe somebody stole something from Walmart and they're pinging me, right? Then I realized they were trying to go talk to me about, come and go work for them, right? So long story short, I think I went ahead at that time, in '96, joined there. There was nothing called data science at that time. I think there were multiple terms, even analytics was not very prevalent. We used to call it data miner at that time, right? So I went there, joined a team, and then the charter there was that I think at a very superficial level, there's a company down south there called Axiom, which works into a lot of this data across, demographics data across US, and they had spent multi-million dollars there. And they wanted to kind of, go get some value out of that. And this is, again, 96, 97 time frame. And there were not many tools out there. There was a company out of Bay Area called NeoVista. They claim that they can come in, spend some $1 million, they can run some models and do something. And this is all very, very, very early days, right? And they thought, hey, this guy is doing some PhD, he can come and go help us out, right? And I knew nothing at that point of time. But a long story short, I think I was able to kind of get in at that point of time, learn what they call drinking from the fire hose, and able to implement something which is called modular category assortment planning, essentially to decide what kind of assortment to put on which store across US, right? So every Walmart before that had exactly same assortment, whether the Walmart is in Texas, El Paso, or is in Boston area. For a given size, it had exactly the same number of shampoos, same number of conditioners, same number of toys. And intuitively, that didn't feel correct, right? Even if you look at demography, the kind of shampoos you may use in an store close to Mexico probably should be very different than what you should use in Connecticut, right? So we ended up kind of, doing something, and a long story short, doing some clustering, figuring out the similar selling behaviors across different parts of the country, and able to basically give an assortment per store, and across all of US, right? Something I'm very proud of, 18 years later, that system still exists, right? And they're still using that and still call the same thing, right? So from there, I moved on to HP in multiple different roles. I worked in their advanced data mining center, did a bunch of stuff in e-commerce, bunch of stuff in customer knowledge management, moved on to global business intelligence, and I think in about 3 years ago, moved back to India to lead their digital and big data practice, right? So worked there 3 years, developing analytical solutions. And about a year and a half ago, I joined now what we call ourselves as InvestNet Yodlee, a company in the fintech space. I'll talk about that later in the conference, right? essentially the goal here is to kind of look at a real interesting and a rich class of data and to get the value out of that. So that was a quick introduction, I guess. Where's my clicker? It is? I don't see it here. So I guess a little bit of a technical issues. I'm just waiting for my clicker, I guess, here. Thank you. Yeah, so I think what I really wanted to talk about today was a bit of an informal topic, right? But I wanted to talk about the concept of democratization of data, and what do I exactly mean by that, right? We'll talk a little bit about what I call who was the first data scientist. We'll talk a little bit about how the data democratization is changing the world we live in, right? And how has my journey evolved and what different things I'm seeing happening across the industry compared to where I have been. And we'll talk a little bit about investment at Yodlee, right? So I think a couple of things I wanted to talk about a little bit, that the color purple, for example, right? Not long ago was something which was extremely rare to the sense, to the point that the Queen of England has basically decreed that only loyalty can use that color. And why was that? It was that because to get to the color purple was extremely, extremely hard. You can see that you had to use like 10,000 shellfish to get 1 gram of this styrene purple. So only royalty was permitted to kind of go use clothing with the color purple, right? And that was it, right? Because this is something extremely rare, only they can do that. And then I think in the year 1856, this one chemistry student, he was doing some research, on some diseases, right? And he accidentally, found, something through a chemical reaction, something which resembled a very dark purple color, right? So I think it was the first purple dye that was invented, right? And then from there, I think purple became very common. People like me and you can go use that, right? And it's very interesting, the analogy with the data here, right? So if you look through that, the Industrial Revolution, the synthetic production of purple started, and then it became a very, very simple common deal, right? I mean, any common person can go use that, right? So the fundamental shift was what, right? Fundamental shift was figuring out to go from something which was extremely rare to make something, use the Industrial Revolution and get to something, which we can use. And I claim that, the similar analogy is happening with the data, right? As I evolve through and look through my journey in the last 20, 25 years, right? And as we kind of go across a time horizon, if you rewind your clock back, 20 years ago, right? The data was, very exclusive, right? Having worked at Walmart, and knowing, having the data inside the enterprise, it's a big, big deal, right? Spend, even at that time, multi-millions of dollars, trying to get all the data onto one place, doing things with that was accessible to only very, very few people, right? And then the people who were accessible to was the reports which the senior executives can look at, and some people who are analysts, right? Who can go work on that, right? What happened, I think, in the last couple of decades, I think a data revolution has come in, right? The data is not all that rare, right? And a lot of healthy organizations have data which has access, across the employee base, right? And that's where I think a fundamental shift is happening right now. That you can see that, and I think over the last 10 years, the access to the data, has gone from an exclusive group, to across the organization, right? Whether you are in marketing, you are in sales, you're in supply chain, you are doing logistics, right? You're doing hardcore engineering. I think you now have access to tools to do that. The data has been what I call democratized in some sense, right? So that's fundamentally changing the way I think that we are doing business now. So, I mean, I want to go back a little bit into the history, right? And in terms of, recording the first use case of, a documented use case of, I would say data mining or data sciences, right? So this looks like, some olive oil, right? So what happened, right? This, Tales of Miletus, in 624 BC, he was born at that time, and what he wanted to do was, he was one of the first person who kind of figured out, right? Was a mathematician, economist at that time, and he would try to go record things in his journal, right? So what we call the so-called the first database. He will record very, very different, things about changes happening in the weather, for example, right? And he'll continue to go, record all those changes. He will try to go record the effect of that on the crops, especially like, the olive crop, right? And he did that in his simple mind. He built some models, right? And essentially what he did was, one particular year, based on his logic of the weather and the crop and everything else, he figured out the harvest for the upcoming